There are stories whispered on the prairie winds, tales that weave through the tall grass and echo across the empty plains when night falls and the world grows still. This one's been told 100 times around cookfires and in saloons from Missouri to Montana, but somehow words never quite capture the heart of what happened that fateful autumn of 1882. Still, this story deserves telling. A story of heartbreak, resilience, and how sometimes the end of one dream can birth something far greater than anyone could have imagined. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Willow Creek wasn't much to speak of, just another struggling cattle town scratched into the unforgiving Montana soil, the kind of place most folks pass through on their way to somewhere else. A handful of weathered buildings lined its single muddy street, a general store with splintering boards for a porch, a church whose bell hadn't rung in months, and the Rusty Spur Saloon that did more business than all other establishments combined. But beyond that modest facade lay Crescent Valley Ranch, 5,000 acres of the richest grazing land in the territory, and the reason Willow Creek existed at all. For 2 decades, the ranch had thrived under the stern hand of Henry Lancaster, a man known as much for his shrewd business sense as for his solitary nature. No one quite understood why a man who'd built such an empire remained alone, but as he approached his 50th year, word spread that Henry had finally decided to take a wife, not through the usual courting rituals, but through a newspaper advertisement. Back east, rich Montana rancher seeks educated, practical woman of good character for matrimony, the notice had read, must be willing to embrace frontier life and help manage substantial holdings. Folk in Willow Creek had snickered at the notion. What kind of woman would travel 2,000 miles to marry a stranger? But Henry Lancaster wasn't one to care what others thought, and when he announced that his bride-to-be would arrive on the October stage, even the most skeptical had to admit a certain curiosity about the woman bold enough to accept such a proposition. That's why half the town had gathered at Willow Creek's stagecoach stop on that crisp autumn afternoon, pretending to go about their business while stealing glances toward the western road. What none of them knew, what none of them could have possibly anticipated, was that 3 days earlier, as the stagecoach carried his intended bride across the Montana territory, Henry Lancaster had suffered a massive heart attack while inspecting a broken fence line in the north pasture. His body hadn't been found until the following morning, already stiff in the cold mountain air. The stage arrived precisely at 3 o'clock, right as the church bell would have tolled had there been anyone to pull its rope. Dust billowed around the carriage as it lurched to a stop, the driver setting the brake with a decisive creak. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the door swung open and she emerged. Rebecca Morgan didn't match anyone's expectations of a mail-order bride. Most had imagined someone plain and desperate, perhaps older and worn by life's disappointments. Instead, they beheld a woman of perhaps 26, her posture straight as a cavalry officer's, her traveling suit impeccably tailored if somewhat wrinkled from the journey. Her chestnut hair was secured in a practical bun beneath a modest hat, and her eyes, clear hazel that seemed to take in everything at once, surveyed the assembled townsfolk with neither timidity nor arrogance. "Welcome to Willow Creek, Martha," Wilson said, stepping forward as the town's self-appointed greeter. The storekeeper's wife clutched her handkerchief nervously. "I'm afraid there's been—" "Where is Mr. Lancaster?" Rebecca interrupted, her voice carrying the refined tones of Boston, but tempered with something steelier. "He was to meet me upon arrival." A heavy silence fell over the crowd. Eyes darted between faces, each person hoping another would speak the dreadful news. Finally, Sheriff Thomas Davis pushed his way through, hat in hand. "Miss Morgan," he began, his weathered face grim beneath his grey mustache. "I'm afraid I have terrible news. Henry Lancaster passed 3 days ago. It was his heart, Doc says. Quick, at least." Those watching later swore they'd never seen a person go so still. Rebecca Morgan didn't gasp or cry out. She didn't sway or reach for support. For several heartbeats, she might have been carved from marble, only her eyes showing life as they narrowed slightly. "I see," she said finally, her voice betraying nothing. "And where has he been laid to rest?" The question, so practical and unexpected, caught the sheriff off guard. "Up on the north hill of his property. Family plot. The service was yesterday." Rebecca nodded once, then turned to the driver who was unloading her trunks. "Please return those to the coach. It seems I shall be departing on the return journey." "Now hold on," Martha Wilson interjected, maternal instinct overriding her usual reserve. "You can't just turn around and leave. The eastbound stage doesn't come through for another 3 days, and you'll need somewhere to stay." "The Willow Creek Inn has a vacancy," offered Emmett Parker, the establishment's proprietor, though his tone suggested the accommodations might be less than Miss Morgan was accustomed to. Rebecca's gaze swept over the dusty street, the curious onlookers, the distant mountains that framed the valley like sentinels. Something unreadable flickered across her features. Not quite resignation, not quite determination, but perhaps a blend of both. "Very well," she said. 3 days. What happened next would later be viewed as the first indication that Rebecca Morgan was not simply a refined Eastern lady ill-equipped for frontier life. Rather than allow Mr. Parker to send someone for her luggage, she supervised its handling herself, giving precise instructions about which trunk contained fragile items. Rather than accept Martha Wilson's offer to show her to the hotel, she asked direct questions about the town's layout and proceeded on her own, her stride purposeful and unhurried. "Strange one, that," muttered Levi Thompson, the blacksmith, as he watched her progress down the street. "Ain't shed a single tear." "Some folks carry their grief on the inside," replied Eleanor Simmons, the postmistress. "Besides, how does one mourn a man never truly met?" That evening, as the sun painted Willow Creek's humble buildings in shades of gold and amber, Rebecca Morgan sat alone in her austere hotel room, a single lamp casting long shadows across the rough wooden floor. From her valise, she withdrew a packet of letters, 12 in all, each bearing Henry Lancaster's bold handwriting. For hours, she read and reread them, her expression unchanging as night claimed the valley. What no one in Willow Creek could have known was that Rebecca Morgan had not traveled all this way purely for matrimony. She had fled Boston and the ruins of a life shattered by scandal, a broken engagement to a man who had proven to be both a liar and a thief, who had used her family's good name to secure investments for ventures that existed only on paper. When the fraud was discovered, her former fiancé had fled with the money, but the Morgan family's reputation lay in tatters. Her father, a respected professor of literature, had suffered a stroke from the shame. Their home had been sold to repay investors. At 26, Rebecca had found herself alone, disgraced by association, with nothing but her education and fierce determination. Henry Lancaster's advertisement had offered not just marriage but escape, a chance to build something new far from the whispers and sidelong glances of Boston society. His letters had revealed a straightforward, intelligent man who valued competence and honesty. He had written of his ranch, his plans for expansion, his hope for a partnership rather than a traditional marriage. It had seemed an equitable arrangement, her education and management skills in exchange for his protection and a fresh start. Now that arrangement lay as dead as the man who had proposed it. The next morning, Rebecca emerged from the hotel dressed not in the morning attire the town might have expected, but in a practical traveling suit of deep blue. She broke her fast at the small cafe adjacent to the hotel, ignoring the curious glances of other patrons as she studied a rough map of the area she had requested from the server. "Might I ask your plans, Miss Morgan?" Sheriff Davis inquired, stopping at her table with coffee cup in hand. "The stage won't arrive until Friday." "I wish to visit Mr. Lancaster's grave," she replied without looking up from the map, "and to see the ranch that was to be my home." The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. "That might not be wise. The ranch is 3 miles out of town and there's some uncertainty about its future now." This caught Rebecca's attention. She looked up, her hazel eyes sharp with interest. "Uncertainty? I was under the impression that Mr. Lancaster was a man of considerable means." "Oh, he was," Davis confirmed, lowering his voice. "But there's complications. Henry never expected to die so sudden-like. His will's not entirely clear on certain matters, and there's his foreman to consider." "His foreman?" "Jackson Cole. Been running the day-to-day operations at Crescent Valley for nigh on 8 years. Some thought Henry might leave him a stake in the place on account of how he built it up, but seems the old man planned to bring in family instead." The sheriff paused, seeming to realize he might have said too much. "Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Anyhow, the lawyers from Helena are sorting it out." Rebecca folded the map with precise movements. "I see. And might there be a way to secure transportation to the ranch today?" Davis scratched his graying head. "Suppose I could have Billy Jenkins drive you out in his wagon. He delivers supplies there twice weekly. That would be most acceptable." 2 hours later, Rebecca found herself seated beside a gangly youth of perhaps 18, whose freckled face and constant stream of chatter belied his skill with the team of horses navigating the rutted road to Crescent Valley Ranch. "Mighty peculiar situation, if you don't mind me saying," Billy Jenkins remarked as the wagon crested a hill, revealing the sweeping vista of the valley below. "Coming all this way to marry Mr. Lancaster, only to find him gone. My ma says it's like something out of one of them dime novels." Rebecca didn't respond immediately. Her attention was captured by the scene spread before her, a lush valley cradled by mountains, bisected by a shimmering creek that wound like a silver ribbon through stands of cottonwood and aspen. Nestled at the center stood a sprawling ranch, house of rough-hewn logs, far larger and more impressive than she had imagined from Henry's descriptions. Surrounding it were tidy outbuildings, corrals, and in the distance the dark shapes of cattle grazing peacefully. "It's beautiful," she murmured, more to herself than to her companion. "That it is," Billy agreed. "Finest spread in 3 counties. Mr. Lancaster knew what he was about when he claimed this land." As they drew closer, the scale of the operation became more apparent. Men on horseback moved purposefully among the herds. Smoke rose from the blacksmith's forge. A team of workers was constructing what appeared to be a new barn. This was no struggling homestead, but a thriving enterprise. The wagon had just crossed a sturdy wooden bridge over the creek when a rider approached at a gallop. The man reined his mount to a halt beside them, dust swirling around horse and rider. Rebecca found herself looking up at a face weathered by sun and wind, with eyes the color of the Montana sky and a jawline shadowed by several days' growth of beard. Though not conventionally handsome, there was something compelling about his features, a kind of quiet strength that commanded attention. "Jenkins," the rider acknowledged with a nod, before turning that penetrating gaze toward Rebecca. "And you must be Miss Morgan." "I am," she confirmed, meeting his eyes directly. "And you, I presume, are Mr. Cole." A flicker of surprise crossed his face, quickly masked. "Jackson Cole, yes ma'am. Foreman of Crescent Valley." He paused, studying her with an intensity that might have discomforted a less resolute woman. "We weren't expecting you to come out here." "Evidently not," Rebecca replied. "However, I wish to pay my respects to Mr. Lancaster and to see the property that featured so prominently in our correspondence." Cole's expression remained unreadable. I'm sorry for your loss, Miss Morgan. Henry was a good man. So his letters suggested, though we never had the opportunity to meet in person. Rebecca adjusted her gloves, a gesture that betrayed more nervousness than she intended to show. I understand there are legal matters being addressed regarding the ranch's future. The foreman's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. There are, but that's not for today. If you'd like to visit Henry's grave, I can show you there myself. I would appreciate that. Cole nodded to Billy. Take Miss Morgan's things to the main house. She can refresh herself there before we ride to the north pasture. The young man's eyes widened. You want her to ride? In that get-up? I assure you, Mr. Jenkins, I am quite capable of riding, Rebecca interjected, her tone brooking no argument. Though I would prefer to change into more suitable attire first. This earned her a considering look from Cole, followed by a short nod. I'll have Sarah show you to a room where you can change. Meet me at the stables in half an hour. The main house of Crescent Valley proved even more impressive up close. Built of massive pine logs and riverstone, it spoke of permanence and prosperity. The interior featured high ceilings, polished wooden floors, and furnishings that skillfully blended frontier practicality with unexpected touches of refinement. A grandfather clock in the entrance hall, leather-bound books on built-in shelves, a piano in the corner of the spacious main room. Sarah, the housekeeper, proved to be a quiet, efficient woman of middle age who showed Rebecca to a guest room without unnecessary conversation. Once alone, Rebecca opened her trunk and withdrew a riding habit she had packed with the expectation of exploring her new home upon arrival. As she changed, her mind worked furiously, processing all she had seen. The ranch was clearly successful, far more so than Henry had indicated in his letters. Its operations seemed well organized and substantial. And the foreman, this Jackson Cole, moved with the confidence of a man in complete command of his domain. There was something in his manner that suggested he viewed himself as more than an employee. The way the workers deferred to him, the proprietary way he had referred to the main house rather than Mr. Lancaster's house, these small details painted a picture of a man who considered himself integral to Crescent Valley's identity. 30 minutes later, Rebecca approached the stables to find Cole waiting with two saddled horses, a sturdy buckskin gelding and a smaller dappled mare. You said you could ride, he remarked, handing her the reins to the mare. How well? Rebecca gathered the reins competently. My father believed in a comprehensive education, Mr. Cole. Horsemanship was included. Without waiting for assistance, she mounted smoothly, arranging her riding skirt with practiced ease. If Cole was impressed, he didn't show it, simply swinging into his own saddle and turning his horse toward a trail that led northward from the ranch compound. They rode in silence for several minutes, the only sounds the creak of leather and the steady rhythm of hooves on packed earth. Rebecca used the time to observe the ranch lands. Fields of harvested hay stretched to the east. A creek lined with cottonwoods meandered through the property. In the distance, cattle grazed on lush autumn grass. Everything spoke of careful management and attention to detail. You've done well with the ranch, she said finally. Cole glanced at her, his expression guarded. Henry built Crescent Valley from nothing. I just helped maintain his vision. From what I observe, you've done more than maintain it. These are not the operations of a caretaker, but of a builder. He didn't respond immediately, guiding his horse around a stand of aspen whose leaves trembled gold in the afternoon light. Henry gave me room to implement changes. He wasn't a man to stand in the way of progress if it benefited the ranch. Yet he sought a wife from the east rather than a local woman, Rebecca observed. One might wonder why. Cole's jaw tightened. That wasn't my business to question. But you did question it. Their eyes met briefly, a silent acknowledgement that she had hit upon truth. Henry was a private man, Cole said finally. Keep to himself mostly, but these past few years, I think he started feeling his age, started thinking about legacy. And you? What do you think about legacy, Mr. Cole? The question seemed to catch him off guard. For a moment, the mask of the efficient foreman slipped, revealing something more complex beneath, ambition, perhaps, or frustration carefully controlled. I think a man's legacy is what he builds with his own hands, he said finally. What? He leaves better than he found it. They crested a gentle rise, and Cole reined his horse to a halt. Before them lay a small, fenced plot beneath the spreading branches of a massive oak tree. Half a dozen weathered headstones stood in neat rows, with a fresh mound of earth marking the newest grave. The Lancaster family plot, Cole explained. Unnecessarily, Henry's parents, who homesteaded the original claim, his younger brother who died of fever, a sister who didn't survive childbirth. Rebecca dismounted without assistance, tying her horse's reins to the fence. The autumn sun cast long shadows across the graves as she opened the gate and stepped inside. The newest headstone was simple but well crafted, the carving fresh and clean. Henry James Lancaster, 1832-1882, builder of Crescent Valley. She stood before it, silent and still. What did one feel for a man known only through letters? Not quite grief, perhaps, but a profound sense of what might have been, possibilities foreclosed by death's abrupt intervention. Rebecca had not loved Henry Lancaster, but she had respected what his letters had revealed, a self-made man of intelligence and determination, someone who valued directness and honesty. In another life, they might have built a partnership of mutual benefit, if not affection. He spoke of you those last few weeks, Cole said quietly, having followed her into the small cemetery. Said you had a good head for business, that you'd help bring Crescent Valley into the next era. Rebecca traced her fingers lightly over the carved lettering. That was our arrangement, my education and management experience in exchange for a fresh start. She paused, then added with unexpected candor, we both sought something pragmatic rather than romantic. Cole studied her with that unsettling intensity. Is that why you came all this way? For pragmatism? Would you prefer, I claim to be heartbroken over a man I never met? Rebecca turned to face him fully. I came because I needed a new beginning, Mr. Cole. Boston held nothing for me but painful memories and closed doors. Mr. Lancaster offered an opportunity to build something meaningful. And now? The question hung between them, weighted with implications neither fully understood. Rebecca looked past him to the sweeping vista of Crescent Valley. Mountains painted with the first dusting of snow, forests aflame with autumn colors, the distant sparkle of the creek winding through fertile grasslands. For a moment, something like longing crossed her features. Now I return east on Friday's stage, she said, her voice steady despite the regret that tightened her throat. Back to whatever future I can cobble together there. Cole's expression darkened. Just like that, you see all this and walk away. What alternative would you suggest, Mr. Cole? Rebecca challenged, a hint of heat entering her voice for the first time. I was to be Henry Lancaster's wife, not his heir. I have no claim here. Maybe not legal claim, he conceded, but moral claim. Henry chose you because he saw something in you that matched his vision for this place. That counts for something. Rebecca shook her head, though something in his words resonated in ways she wasn't prepared to examine. A vision requires legal standing to implement, as I'm sure you're well aware. The lawyers from Helena will decide Crescent Valley's fate, not the wishes of a mail-order bride who arrived too late. Cole fell silent, his gaze shifting to the mountains on the horizon as though seeking answers in their ancient contours. When he spoke again, his voice had changed, less the efficient foreman and more the man beneath the role. "Have dinner at the main house tonight," he said abruptly. "There's something you should see before you decide your course." The invitation, or command, for it wasn't entirely clear which Cole intended, caught Rebecca by surprise. Propriety suggested she should decline, return to the hotel in town, maintain the distance appropriate to their uncertain circumstances. Yet curiosity, that fatal flaw that had led her into intellectual pursuits unseemly for a Boston lady, pulled at her stronger than caution. "Very well," she agreed, "though I must return to town afterward." Cole nodded once, his expression unreadable. "I'll have Jenkins bring the wagon at 9. As they rode back toward the main house, Rebecca found herself studying the foreman with new interest. Jackson Cole was not what she had expected in a ranch foreman. His speech, though flavored with frontier directness, lacked the rough edges one might anticipate. He sat his horse with the easy confidence of a man born to the saddle. Yet there was an alertness to his manner that spoke of formal training, military perhaps. And beneath his businesslike exterior lay something deeper, glimpsed only in flashes, when his guard slipped: intelligence, ambition, and a fierce attachment to Crescent Valley that went beyond mere employment. The sun was beginning its descent when they returned to the ranch compound, painting the buildings in warm hues of amber and gold. Workers were returning from the fields, stable hands tending to horses, a cook beckoning children away from their play and toward the bunkhouse where dinner would be served. It was a scene of organized industry, a community rather than simply a business. Cole escorted Rebecca to the main house's broad porch, then tipped his hat. 7 o'clock for dinner. Sarah will show you to a room where you can rest meanwhile. Before she could respond, he was gone, striding toward a group of cowboys who had just ridden in, dust from the trail still clinging to their clothing. His voice carried on the evening air, asking about cattle counts and grazing conditions with the authority of a man accustomed to command. Left alone, Rebecca was shown to a comfortable guest room by the taciturn Sarah, who provided fresh water for washing and the information that dinner would be served promptly at 7 in the main dining room. Once the housekeeper departed, Rebecca sank onto the edge of the bed, suddenly aware of the bone-deep exhaustion that had been held at bay by the day's revelations. Everything had happened so quickly. Just days ago, she had been on a train heading west, anxiety and hope warring within her as she contemplated marriage to a stranger. Then the stagecoach, the dusty street of Willow Creek, the devastating news delivered by the sheriff. And now this, a visit to the grave of her almost husband and cryptic dinner invitation from his foreman, a man who seemed to view her presence as both intrusion and opportunity. Rebecca rose and moved to the window, gazing out at Crescent Valley as evening shadows lengthened across its expanse. Despite herself, she felt drawn to this place, its rugged beauty, its self-contained world, the promise of purpose it seemed to offer. In Boston, she had been defined by scandal and loss, her identity reduced to poor Miss Morgan, whose fiancé had fled with investors' money. Here, no one knew that story. Here, she could be simply Rebecca Morgan, a woman of education and ability. But such thoughts were dangerous fantasies. In 3 days, she would board the eastbound stage and leave Montana behind. Whatever Jackson Cole intended to show her tonight wouldn't change that reality. It couldn't. At precisely 7 o'clock, Rebecca descended the stairs to the main floor of the Lancaster home, now wearing a dinner dress of deep burgundy, one of the few formal gowns she had packed for her new life in the West. Sarah met her at the foot of the stairs, her perpetual frown softening slightly at the sight of Rebecca properly attired. "This way, Miss Morgan," the housekeeper said, leading her through the main sitting room to a dining room dominated by a massive table crafted from polished pine. The settings were simple but elegant. China that had likely traveled by wagon. From the east, silver that gleamed in the lamplight, crystal glasses that caught and reflected the warm glow. Jackson Cole awaited her, standing beside the head of the table. He had exchanged his working clothes for a clean shirt and waistcoat, his hair still damp from washing. The transformation emphasized what Rebecca had glimpsed earlier, that beneath the dust and pragmatism of the foreman lay a man of unexpected refinement. "Miss Morgan," he acknowledged, pulling out a chair for her. "I hope you found time to rest." "Thank you, yes," she replied, taking the offered seat. "Though I confess to some curiosity about this dinner invitation." Cole took the chair opposite, rather than at the head of the table, a small gesture that Rebecca noted with interest, a choice of equals rather than hierarchy. "All in good time," he said, as Sarah began serving a hearty stew accompanied by fresh bread. "First, I think we should become better acquainted since circumstances have thrown us into this unusual situation." Rebecca raised an eyebrow. "What would you like to know, Mr. Cole?" "Let's start with why a Boston lady of evident education and refinement would agree to marry a frontier rancher she'd never met." The directness of the question might have offended another woman, but Rebecca found it refreshing after months of Eastern society's veiled meanings and polite evasions. "Necessity," she answered honestly. "My previous engagement ended poorly. The aftermath left my family in reduced circumstances." Cole's expression remained neutral, but his eyes sharpened with interest. Reduced circumstances rarely send women 2,000 miles west to marry strangers. Rebecca met his gaze steadily. "My former fiancé proved to be less than honorable in his business dealings. When the truth was discovered, he fled, leaving investors unpaid, and my family's reputation in ruins. My father suffered a stroke from the shock and shame. Our home was sold to repay those who had trusted my fiancé on the strength of our family's good name." She paused, then added with quiet dignity, "In Boston, I was damaged goods, Mr. Cole. Mr. Lancaster's advertisement offered a chance to be judged on my abilities rather than my past." Cole absorbed this information in silence, breaking a piece of bread with strong, capable hands. "And what abilities would those be?" he asked finally. "I was educated at Miss Porter's school, then privately tutored in subjects typically reserved for young men: mathematics, accounting, business principles. For the past 5 years, I assisted my father in managing the finances for several small businesses owned by family friends." A hint of pride entered her voice. "Under my supervision, all showed marked improvement in profits and efficiency. Henry knew all this." I detailed my qualifications in my response to his advertisement. His letters indicated he was particularly interested in my experience with bookkeeping and inventory management. Something like grudging respect flickered in Cole's eyes. Henry always did have an eye for talent. They ate in silence for several minutes. The only sounds, the clink of silverware against china and the distant murmur of ranch activities winding down for the evening. Outside, twilight deepened toward night, the vast Montana sky ablaze with stars, rarely visible through Boston's coal smoke and gas lamps. "And you, Mr. Cole?" Rebecca asked eventually. "What brought you to Crescent Valley?" He looked up, surprised by the turnabout. "War, like most things that change a man's course. I served with the Union Cavalry. Afterward, didn't much fancy returning east to cramped cities and counting houses. Worked my way west, ranch to ranch, until I fetched up here 8 years ago." "And Henry Lancaster gave you a chance?" "He did more than that. For the first time, real emotion colored Cole's voice. He recognized I had more to offer than just breaking horses and mending fences, gave me responsibility, then authority. Let me implement changes when I showed they'd benefit the ranch. He paused, his gaze drifting to the window and the darkness beyond. 2 years ago, he made me full foreman, said he was getting too old to ride fence lines and chase down strays. Rebecca studied him with new understanding. So you became the de facto manager of Crescent Valley. I suppose I did. Cole's attention returned to her, his blue eyes intent. Which brings us to why I asked you here tonight. Sarah chose that moment to clear their plates and bring coffee, delaying whatever revelation Cole had planned. When they were alone again, he rose and crossed to a roll-top desk in the corner of the room, removing a leather folder that he placed on the table between them. 3 weeks ago, Henry had me ride to Helena with him to meet his lawyer, Cole began, his voice carefully neutral. He'd been feeling his age, he said. Wanted to put his affairs in order before his bride arrived. He opened the folder, revealing several official-looking documents. He made changes to his will. Rebecca's pulse quickened. What sort of changes? Complicated ones. Cole pushed the papers toward her. The lawyers still sorting through the legal language, but the intent seems clear enough. Henry left Crescent Valley to his nephew in Philadelphia, a man who's never set foot in Montana and has no interest in ranching. Rebecca frowned, scanning the documents. That hardly seems the decision of a man concerned with his legacy. Keep reading. She turned the page, her eyes widening slightly as she absorbed the next paragraph. He left provisions for you. A significant portion of the liquid assets and 20% ownership interest in the ranch operations. Cole nodded. More than I expected, less than I'd hoped for. But it's what comes next that concerns us both. Rebecca continued reading, her trained eye moving quickly through the legal terminology. When she reached the relevant section, she fell still, her fingers tightening on the paper. He made additional provisions for his bride, she said slowly, looking up to meet Cole's gaze. For me. For Rebecca Morgan, yes. Cole leaned forward, his forearms on the table. Henry left you 20% ownership of Crescent Valley Ranch, contingent upon your arrival and the marriage taking place. He specially noted your business acumen as an asset to the ranch's future. Rebecca set the document down carefully, her mind racing. But the marriage didn't take place. Mr. Lancaster died before I arrived. That's the legal question the lawyers are untangling. Cole's expression was impossible to read in the lamplight. The will states, contingent upon her arrival and our marriage. You arrived. The marriage became impossible through no fault of yours. Duh. So the lawyers might interpret the provision as valid, despite the lack of marriage, Rebecca mused, thinking aloud. Or they might rule it invalid because the explicit condition wasn't met. Exactly. Cole rose, moving to pour more coffee. For them both. Either way, Henry's nephew Thomas gets majority control. But if your 20% stands and my 20% stands, he let the implication hang unspoken. Rebecca finished the thought. Together, we would hold 40% ownership, not controlling interest, but enough to significantly influence decisions. Enough to prevent Thomas Lancaster from selling Crescent Valley to the mining interests who've been sniffing around the northern borders, Cole said bluntly. Enough to protect what Henry built from being carved up for quick profit. The pieces fell into place with sudden clarity. That's why you brought me here today. Why you wanted me to see the ranch, to visit Henry's grave. You're hoping I'll stay and fight for my potential claim. Cole didn't deny it. I'm hoping you'll recognize that Henry chose you for a reason, that his death doesn't negate the fact that he saw something in you that matched his vision for this place. Or perhaps you simply need an ally against Thomas Lancaster. Rebecca countered, though without heat. My 20% added to yours creates a formidable opposition. A hint of a smile touched Cole's stern features. Maybe it's both. Rebecca rose, moving to the window to gaze out at the night. Stars dusted the velvet sky, so numerous and bright they seemed close enough to touch. The silhouettes of outbuildings and corrals formed a small civilization carved from wilderness by vision and hard work. In the distance, a coyote called its lonely song echoing across the valley. I was to have a new beginning here, she said softly. A purpose, a place where my past mistakes wouldn't define me. You still could. Cole had moved to stand beside her, not touching, but close enough that she could sense his presence. Solid, steady, unexpectedly comforting. Stay. Fight for your claim. Help me protect what Henry built. Rebecca turned to face him, suddenly, aware of how this man, a stranger just hours ago, had somehow become a potential ally in a future she hadn't imagined possible this morning. And if the lawyers rule the provision invalid? If I have no legal claim? Then you'll have lost. Nothing but 3 days, Cole replied. The stage still runs east every week. Rebecca studied him in the lamplight, the weathered face that spoke of years under the Montana sun, the capable hands that had helped build Crescent Valley into what it was today, the eyes that held both determination and something else, something that might have been hope. You're asking a great deal of a woman you've just met, Mr. Cole. I'm asking exactly what Henry asked in his advertisement, he countered. For a practical woman of education and character to help manage substantial holdings. The circumstances have changed, but the opportunity remains. He paused, then added with unexpected gentleness, and I think you feel it too, the pull of this place. I saw it in your face when we crested that hill and you first laid eyes on Crescent Valley. Rebecca couldn't deny the truth in Cole's words. She did feel drawn to Crescent Valley in ways that defied logical explanation. 3 days, she said finally. I'll stay 3 days while we await the lawyer's preliminary findings. Cole's expression remained neutral, but something like satisfaction flickered in his eyes. A wise decision. Neither could have predicted how those 3 days would transform them both, how shared purpose would forge an unexpected bond, how Rebecca's business acumen would complement Cole's practical knowledge, how together they would begin crafting a strategy to save Crescent Valley from Thomas Lancaster's mining interests. And neither could have anticipated how, months later, they would stand together on that same porch, partners in all things, watching the sunset paint their valley gold. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.